Imagine you are walking home alone at night and a stranger steps out of the shadows holding a knife. Your heart would slam into your chest. Your legs would go weak. Every system in your body would flood with a single signal: run. That response, the one you cannot control, the one that happens before you even finish processing what you are looking at, has kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Now imagine that signal never comes. Not because you are brave, not because you have trained yourself, but because the part of your brain that sends it is simply gone. There is a woman who has lived her entire life exactly like this. Scientists have studied her for decades, and what they found did not make them envious. It made them afraid for her. She is known in neuroscience literature only as SM. Her real name has never been published. She has a rare genetic condition called Urbach-Wiethe disease, which caused calcium to deposit in her brain during childhood, slowly and selectively destroying a small almond-shaped structure deep in her temporal lobe called the amygdala. Both of them completely, bilaterally, gone. The amygdala is the brain's threat detection system. It is the structure responsible for processing fear, for triggering the fight or flight response, for flagging danger before your conscious mind has time to evaluate it. Every animal with a vertebral column has one. It is one of the oldest structures in the brain, conserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution, because animals that detected threats and responded to them survived, and the ones that did not became someone else's meal. SM's amygdala does not function. It cannot function, and the result is not what most people imagine when they picture a life without fear. Researchers at the University of Iowa, led by neuroscientist Justin Feinstein, spent years documenting exactly what SM's fearlessness looks like in practice. They took her to an exotic pet store and placed her in front of tanks of large snakes and tarantulas. SM had previously said she disliked snakes. She reached into the tank anyway. She touched them. She laughed. She had to be guided away. They showed her clips from horror films selected specifically for their ability to induce fear in normal subjects. She found them interesting. She reported no fear, no unease, nothing that registered as threat. They took her to one of the most reputedly haunted locations in the United States, a reportedly terrifying Halloween haunted house that routinely made grown adults run screaming from the building. SM walked through it slowly, examining the actors who jumped out at her with what witnesses described as pure curiosity. At one point, she startled an actor who was trying to frighten her by reaching out and touching his face. She was not performing bravery. She was genuinely neurologically incapable of feeling threatened. But here is where the case stops being fascinating and starts being something much harder to look at. Because SM's life outside the laboratory was not an adventure. It was a series of events that any functioning fear response would have prevented. Over the years of study, researchers pieced together a history that no one had connected properly until they started looking. SM had been held at gunpoint. She had been held at knife point. She had been physically assaulted. She had been threatened with death on more than one occasion. In each case, she had not run. She had not fought. She had not called for help in time. She had simply failed to register that she was in danger until the danger had already made contact with her. The absence of fear that looked like superpower in a laboratory looked like something else entirely in the real world. It looked like an open door that anyone with bad intentions could walk through. Her brain had no alarm system, and the world, it turned out, was full of people who look for exactly that. There is a specific incident that Feinstein and his colleagues described in their 2011 paper in the journal Current Biology that crystallizes this better than any laboratory test. SM was walking through a park at night when a man on a bench called her over. He was holding a knife. What happened next was not what would happen to you or to anyone whose amygdala is intact. She did not freeze. She did not run. She walked over to him. The encounter ended without serious physical harm, but not because SM protected herself. It ended for reasons that had nothing to do with her judgment or her instincts, because she had neither operating in that moment. She survived the encounter the way a person survives walking into traffic and getting lucky with the timing, not through response, through circumstance. Feinstein wrote that he and his team left many of these sessions feeling shaken in ways that SM herself never did. And then, in 2013, something happened that changed everything the scientific community thought it understood about fear and the amygdala. Feinstein's team administered something called the carbon dioxide inhalation test to SM. It is a standard laboratory procedure. Subjects breathe air with an elevated concentration of carbon dioxide, which creates a brief, powerful sensation of suffocation. In neurologically typical subjects, the response is immediate and overwhelming. Panic, desperate need to breathe. Every fear response in the body firing simultaneously. In SM, whose amygdala was completely destroyed, whose brain had shown no fear, response to snakes, knives, haunted houses, or armed attackers, the carbon dioxide hit her system, and she panicked. Completely. Immediately. She reported feeling terror. She clawed at the mask. She needed the test stopped. Afterward, she said it was the most afraid she had ever felt in her life, which, given her neurological profile, means it may have been the first time she had ever felt afraid at all. The experiment proved something that restructured the field's understanding of fear. Overnight. The amygdala is not the only pathway fear can travel. There is a second route, a deeper one. One that bypasses the amygdala entirely and connects directly to the brainstem, the most primitive part of the brain, the part that does not process or evaluate or consider, the part that simply reacts. The carbon dioxide had accessed that pathway directly, and what it triggered in a woman who had never felt fear in her life was indistinguishable from the panic felt by any other human being on the planet. This means the fear you feel is not a single thing running through a single system. It is a layered architecture. The amygdala handles the processed version, the fear that involves context and memory and learned associations. The part that knows a dark alley at night is different from a dark room in your own home. The brainstem handles something more primitive, something that does not know context, something that responds only to the most basic physiological signal of all. The body is not getting what it needs to survive. Right now, immediately. SM had lost the first layer completely. The second layer was still there, waiting for a threat direct enough to bypass everything else and hit it at the source. It had just never been triggered in 60 years of living, because no predator, no weapon, no horror film had ever reached deep enough. Only the sensation of suffocation did. Only the thing that speaks directly to the body rather than the brain. Here is what that tells you about the fear you spend so much time trying to get rid of. The anxiety before a difficult conversation, the dread of something going wrong, the unease that follows you into rooms where you do not feel safe. All of it is running on a system so ancient and so deeply embedded in your biology that even a brain with no amygdala cannot fully escape it. Your fear is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of mindset. It is not something that people with stronger personalities have learned to overcome. It is a structure built over hundreds of millions of years specifically to keep something like you alive in a world full of things that would prefer you were not. SM lived without it, and the cost was not paid in a laboratory with snakes and horror films. It was paid in a park at night and at gunpoint and in every moment where the alarm that should have sounded simply did not, because the hardware that runs it was gone before she was old enough to remember having it. The woman in the neuroscience papers smiled at snakes and laughed in haunted houses. She also walked toward a man with a knife, because nothing in her told her not to. That is the complete picture. And the next time your body fills with fear over something that your rational mind insists is manageable, remember that you are not malfunctioning. You are running a system so old it does not speak in words. It speaks in heartbeats and adrenaline and the urge to move before you know why. That system is not your enemy. For hundreds of thousands of years, it was the only reason any of your ancestors made it to tomorrow. It is the only reason you are here to feel it now.